of you that are just joining in, I want to welcome you to the Charlotte area SharePoint user group. This is going to be our August 19th, 2021 meetup. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to tonight's speaker. In our quest to bring you the best and brightest all across the Microsoft world, I reached out to a good friend of the community, as well as SharePoint Saturday speaker here in Charlotte and YouTube sensation, Reza Dorrani. Reza is a expert in Power Automate. I've known Reza for quite a few years now, going back to SharePoint Saturday events. I believe that's where we actually first met. But Reza's been super active in the community now for a number of years, specifically as it relates to things like the Power Platform, Power Automate, as well as Power Apps. Typically, when I have a question about something related to Power Automate, I end up in Reza's content in order to find some of those solutions and some of those answers. He has a thriving YouTube channel. If you haven't been there, he's crossed the threshold of 20,000 subscribers. I haven't checked today to see the number that we're at, but be sure to check out his YouTube channel. It's awesome. The work there is top notch, and I've been watching for quite a while now, and every single month he's making new improvements to the presentation and what he's doing over there. It's really awesome to see somebody who's a YouTuber on the outside, kind of lurking on the fringes. So be sure to definitely check that out. But as I've said, known Reza for a number of years now, and our colleague here, Daniel Christian, has teamed up with Reza to deliver a bi-weekly podcast, so twice a month. And they're calling it R&D, which I think is a pretty clever name, considering what they're actually doing. It's pretty awesome there, guys. So big hats off to you on that. So they do these podcast or live streams on YouTube every other Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So we'll make sure to post a link up to that along with the materials that we post up from this evening. So tonight, it's all about Power Automate. There's a ton of resources on his YouTube channel around this, but I thought it'd be awesome to get the expert here in person, virtually, and actually talk about this. I'm going to stop sharing now, and with no further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to our good friend Reza. How are you?
Thank you, Andy. I'm doing well. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Andy, it's been 2 years. I haven't seen you
yeah,
in person.
We've been under lockdown.
yeah.
It's,
as Andy said, we met in the Charlotte user group back in 2018. I believe that's when I was.
I think that's about right.
I started being involved in the community, and I haven't said it, but I'll say it now on this call. Very few warmly receive people who are new. And Andy is definitely one of them. In fact, Dan Christian and Andy, both of them were very supportive, and probably this is the right platform for me to say thank you to you for always being supportive, and more importantly, helping new people. I think it's very easy to help people who are above you. That's what everybody does, right? Like whoever's above you, it's very easy to step up and say, yeah, you're doing great, but it's not easy to do so for newbies. So thank you so much for supporting me and my work. And I actually had an introduction slide, and I think your introduction for me beat that. So I've removed that slide now. So
well, thank you so much for being here. Our whole philosophy is sharing is caring. That's the statement of the community, and any opportunity we get to pay it forward, that is definitely something that we want to do. So we try to be as open and inviting in this group as possible. You know, I'm glad that you are part of it and been able to speak at a number of our events and to be here this evening to speak with us. I personally strongly believe in paying it forward, for trying to bring everybody into the party, so to speak. and give everybody an opportunity. And your growth over just the last like 3 or 4 years has just been astronomical. It's just been really cool to watch. And I mean, I got to tell you, like the YouTube channel really taken off for you over the last year. So that's been really fun for me to watch on the outside. I talked to Daniel a little bit, and we kind of geek out over it and some of the numbers, and it's been really awesome to watch. And as I said, like I've noticed like every single video you try to get better. Every single video that you release, you try to do something a little bit better. You know, you can tell subtle things in the audio here, subtle things in the presentation there, or, you know, something with this demo here, working on the post processing and the editing. That takes so much work. So hats off to you. It's really awesome.
Thank you. It's the love of the audience that honestly makes me work harder. So if many people have asked me what's your best video, and I tell them it's my next one, because I really work hard on every video is like a baby I put out there. Yeah, there are many that fail, there are few that succeed. It's okay. I keep trying, and I always try and do new things. I think there are a lot of events going on everywhere, and not taking a dig at anyone, but I know people who take a topic and that topic they run with it for the whole year. They're speaking that same topic at 100 different events. So goal always is to give something unique. Today's topic, by the way, is approvals in Power Automate. Is this something unique for me? No, I've spoken on this topic before, but I do have content that is unique, and scenarios that I have taken from real world experiences, recent projects that I've worked on, and I hope that the things that I showcase today come in handy for the folks on this call and whoever will watch the recording later on as well on the YouTube channel, which, by the way, I did subscribe the moment you put that link out. So
awesome.
All right, so we'll get started with today's presentation, and just to save bandwidth, I will turn off my video, and I will switch to full screen presentation mode. Andy, you're going to be my voice, so please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, you're coming through.
All right, perfect. So I just have one screen. I'm actually in an apartment in Atlanta, Georgia. So I'm also in the East Coast time zone right now. And I don't have a second screen, so I'm not looking at the chat, but I promise at the end of the session, as you have questions, post them in the chat. I will take each and every one of your questions at the end. So the topic, Power Automate approvals. I actually removed my intro. I'm not lying. I did remove my intro slide because I don't think I can beat what Andy did earlier. So let's straight away get into it, and let's try and use the next 40 to 50 minutes to deep dive into the approvals. So the learning objectives for this session, which it's in quite a hurry to move ahead. Power Automate approvals overview. We will look at what is the approvals action, what are the different features it comprises of. Then the topic was approvals on the go, which basically means you can take the approval decision in multiple locations on the web, in your mobile app, in Microsoft Teams, and more. Then we come to demo, and I promise you my PowerPoint deck probably has just 10 or 12 slides. So I'm not going to bore you with slides. It's going to be more or less demos. Some of them are pre-built, some of them are live. So I have a good mix of demos to keep it interesting, and tried to cover different scenarios with real world examples. And then finally, we will look at a few best practices and limitations based on my experience of working with the approvals action. And finally, I will round it up with some learning materials, which will help you to get started with your journey in Power Automate approvals. Now, Power Automate is end-to-end automation. It's one of the services or one of the pillars of the Power Platform. And Power Automate allows intelligent automation. It's a software as a service, workflow process designer, and orchestrator. That's what Power Automate is designed for. And for folks who have knowledge or who've heard about Logic Apps, which is available as a service in Azure, Power Automate is a subset of that service that is offered to us within Office 365 or M365. So in Power Automate, if I need to connect to any cloud service or any internal API services, Power Automate has over 450 plus connectors that are available for us to connect to our data sources. The user group here in Charlotte is all about SharePoint. So of course, 95, or in fact, I think all of my demos are more or less focused on SharePoint as a data source. And we will connect to SharePoint through the SharePoint connector that's available in Power Automate. Of course, if you have documents, forms, invoices, images, basically, if you need to scan data within specific documents, we have artificial intelligence baked into the platform that Power Automate can take advantage of through something known as AI Builder, which again is an encapsulation of Azure's cognitive services. And then if you have any legacy Windows, web, or terminal applications that do not expose any APIs, and you would like to connect to that as well, you can bring in the power of robotic process automation through something known as desktop flows in Power Automate. So this service is truly providing you end-to-end automation to connect to your data services, no matter where they live, on premises or in the cloud. Now, as part of Power Automate, we have a connector called the approvals connector. And this is an inbuilt action in Power Automate that is specifically designed for approval scenarios. And this can be customized to fit your business needs. If you look at the screenshot on the right-hand side, right next to the approval logo, I have this image here that shows us the 3 actions that the approval connector exposes. And within these actions, you have the different types of approvals that you can select. And there are 4 types that are available. I will discuss what these are when we actually get to the demo. You can also have external users who are not a part of your Active Directory but are invited to your AD as guests. They can be added and they can be involved in your approval process. And for folks who are very much into the licensing scheme of things, the Power Automate approval action is a standard connector. That means in order for us to leverage this connector, a standard Office license will suffice. No additional premium licensing related to Power Automate is required to utilize the approvals connector. The next part is approvals on the go. So when you leverage this approvals action or this approvals connector to create approval scenarios and assign tasks to your users can then respond to the task from multiple locations. The first option they have is the approval dashboard. This is available directly on the web in the Flow portal. There, users can view all the requests or the approval requests that they have received, approval requests that they have sent. They can see a historical data of their requests and directly take an action on the approval. The second option is through email and through a concept known as actionable messages. So when an approval task is assigned to a specific user, that user gets notified about the approval, plus they can give their approval response directly within the email itself. And within the email, they get the options for the approval response, and they get an option to even enter comments right within the email. The third option that they have is through the Power Automate mobile app. If they have the mobile app installed on their mobile device, they will get notified, and directly within the app itself, they can give their approval response. The fourth option is through Microsoft Teams. In fact, there are 2 options, 4 and 5, both related to Teams. One of them is the new approvals app that's available within Microsoft Teams. And once you have that app installed, any approval that gets assigned to you, you will be notified right there in that app just like we have the approval center dashboard, the Teams approvals app also has the dashboard for you, and you can take all actions right there. The last option there is the adaptive card experience, wherein you can use the Power Automate bot in Teams to send a message to the user. And that message is in the form of a card that looks very similar to what this diagram showcases here on the actionable messaging piece. I'm talking about this one right here. So it looks very similar to this. And then once the user gets that message, they can directly take a response or provide a response to the approval action from Teams itself. Now, when you're building your approvals in Power Automate, you do not have to start from scratch. And the advantage here in Power Automate is that we have been provided with various templates that we can select. And these templates are very easy to configure, and these are pre-built. They are uploaded on the approval template section through Microsoft. And you will find here templates that are created by Microsoft, that are created by the community, and created by third-party providers. All of these templates are, of course, vetted, as in there is a lot of there are some rules and policies, and Microsoft does evaluate each of those templates before they are made available. So there is no concern about using a specific template and which could potentially result in a data leak. However, it's important to note that these templates are classified based on who have provided them or who has made it available. And the beauty of templates is you do not have to reinvent the wheel, because a template already has most of the work pre-done for you if it matches your scenario. And now we will head over straight to demo for approvals. I will cover this in 4 parts. First, I'll show you what the approval action is, what are the different features, and how can we utilize it. Then I will showcase approval patterns. For example, serial approvals or parallel approvals or state machine style approvals. Then I will showcase how you can assign your approvers dynamically. And finally, how you can maintain a history for your approval actions as your task goes through the process that you have defined. So I'm going to head over to my browser experience, and Andy, once again, I'll need your help. Can you please let me know if you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So I'm going to assume that I'm going to assume that the audience here is starting off with Power Automate. So the way you get started with this is you go to flow.microsoft.com, and your account needs to have a license. In my scenario here, if we look at the license that's assigned to my user here, I have the standard Office licensing that gives me access to Power Automate as well. And here I can start creating flows based on different scenarios. Now we are just trying to understand the approval action first. So I'm not going to tie this to any data service or add any automations for now. So I will create a flow that triggers manually by clicking a button. So I'm going to use the manual trigger flow and click create. And this one I'm going to call my user group flow. So this flow starts when I click the button, and this is a virtual button that I need to select. Now in Flow, if I head over to New Step and search for approvals, there is a connector that's available for approvals. So I'm going to select this. And within this, we have 3 actions that we can utilize. We have the start and wait for an approval action, wherein the approval begins and waits for the approval process to end, waits for that specific task to finish. And what is waiting? The flow will be waiting. Now, we also have create an approval and wait for an approval. These 2 actions are nothing but a breakdown version of this action. So if I want to create an approval and not force the flow to wait, maybe I would like to create an approval, send some emails out, maybe update some status and some system of record, and then I would like to wait for the approval. I can use the create and approval action in flow, then add my additional steps, and then finally go ahead and wait. It is very important to initiate the wait because the wait is what will cause the flow to stop at that specific point until the approval action has been responded to. And that's when you will get all the details of the response that the approvers provide. So that's the main difference between start and wait for an approval and the create an approval and then initiate wait for an approval. In this case, I'll pick start and wait for an approval. That means the approval begins and immediately waits. And the first property that we need to select is the approval type. And this is where those 4 approval types come into play. Now in Power Automate, we are provided with just 4 options. However, by building different patterns, you can create any scenarios around approvals. And I'll show that in my demos. Now here we have the first 2 options, which is called approve/reject. Now the first 2 options, basically what it does is if I was to select any of these, the approver or the approvers would get a couple of decisions or a couple of buttons so that they can respond to the approval action. And those buttons would be called approve and reject. That means they're going to get only 2 options. They have to select one of them. Everyone must approve, meaning if I assign this task to, let's say, 3 users, each and every one of those 3 users have to say approved. If even one of them say reject, the task stands as rejected. So basically the first action is like parallel approvals. I'm assigning a task to 3 users. All of them get independent tasks and all of them have to say approved. If even one says rejected, the process is marked as rejected. The second one is first to respond. That means if I was to assign the task to, let's say, 3 people again, the first person who responds to that action, their decision would be considered final. So if Reza and Andy and Dan get the approval action with first to respond, Andy comes in and says, I reject this approval request, the entire approval request would stand as rejected. These are the first 2 options that we have. Then we have custom responses. Custom responses meaning you can define what options the user gets when they are responding. That means I can add multiple options here. For example, I can say approve, reject, deferred, or I can say yes, no, it's your choice. You can create those buttons that the users will get as the task gets assigned to them. So this is when you need custom responses. If you are okay with just the approve and reject feature, which is more or less the case for a lot of the approval scenarios, then you are free to use the first 2 actions. Otherwise, you can use the bottom 2. And then the features here are quite similar. It will wait for all the responses. In this case, it will wait for one response. That means here it will wait for everybody to give their decision. Here, the moment the first person responds, that decision would be considered final. So this is the basic understanding that you need to have before you get into building approval processes. Now, in this case, I'm going to start with the easiest action, which is first to respond. So I'm going to select this. And here I get a title that I can create for my approval process. So let's say I'm going to call this my user group sample approval. That's the title that I'm creating. Then comes assign to. This is where I can assign the task to my approvers. And IntelliSense is more or less guiding you through this. It clearly says that it needs email addresses and they need to be separated by a semicolon. You can even have group related or AD group related email addresses in here. All the users in that group will get the task assigned. Now, in this case, to keep it extremely simple, I'm going to assign this task to a couple of users, Reza, which I assigned twice for some reason. And then I have another user in my tenant called Sarah. So Sarah and Reza will get this approval task, and whoever responds first, their decision will be considered final. Details is where I can provide additional details about the approval action. So let's say I'm doing an approval on a leave request solution. So I can provide all the details that the user has entered right here. In this case, I'm just going to call this sample data. I can provide a link to my item that is currently under approval. I can give a description. I can go to show advanced options here. I can define who the requester is. I can enable notifications. If I turn this off, no email will be sent out. No alerts will go out to the users and teams. Ideally, you will want this to be yes. You also have the option of reassignment. By default, it's yes. That means a user can reassign their task to any other user in the organization. You cannot control which users they can reassign to currently. So if you enable reassignment, they can assign the task to any user in the organization. Additionally, you can also upload attachments so that when they receive the approval task, they get the attachments as well. A good use case would be document-based approvals. Right? I have an approval for any document that gets created in my document library. The process begins. I can attach it right here and send it out to my approvers. Now this is start and wait for an approval. If I was to go ahead and use the other action, which is the create an approval action, just to show you that there is no difference between this one and this one, the options are exactly the same. Let's say I pick everyone must approve here. All the features are exactly the same. Title, assign to, there's nothing different. The only difference between this action and this action is here the flow will immediately wait. Here the flow will not wait and move ahead. And what you need to do to stop the flow then, so it waits, is you can use the wait for an approval action. And all this needs is the ID of the approval to stop waiting. And to get that ID, right here under dynamic content from the create an approval action, if you search for approval ID, that's the identity. It's a unique GUID that gets created on the fly that you can provide here. So basically now this and this, the combination of these two will do the same thing. Okay, I'm going to remove these. All right, so the approval task is created here, and the first person to respond, their decision will be considered fine. Now, how do I check the response? Well, very common use case is to add a condition to check the response because you want to know whether they've approved it or whether they've rejected it. And the way you can do that in Flow is go to a new step and add a condition. And the condition here, I will check the outcome of my approval. An outcome again is a dynamic property that the approval action exposes. So I'm going to select this. Now, because I'm using approve/reject, this is case sensitive. That's exactly how the response is going to come in. So if I want to check to see if it is approve or rejected, I have to use the same text right here. If I do approved, it's not going to get me the right result. It has to match the text. In this case, it's approve, APPROVE with a capital A. So here I'm checking to see if the response is approved. If it is, I can send an email, update status, whatever the use case is. Here I'm going to keep it extremely simple. I'm going to say approved. I'm just going to print approved in the flow, nothing else. And if it's rejected, I'm going to go right here and print rejected. Okay, so I'm going to say reject. Now, apart from saying approved or rejected, is there any other pieces of information that I can get from the approval action? Well, the answer is yes. You can get a lot of things. You can get things like a response summary. This is a string of text that gives you the full details of the approval response. So let's select this. Let's print it out and see how it works. Next, you get something known as the outcome of the approval, which I'm already checking right here. I get the approval ID, details, and then there's something known as responses. And responses has a lot of properties that I can pick from. Who the approver was, what's the display name of the approver, the email address of the approver, at what date was the task assigned to them, at what date did the approver respond, what are the comments that the approver put in. There are a lot of good details here that the responses action provides that you can leverage. The key thing to note though here is responses is an array. a collection. Why? Well, the way Microsoft has designed the approval action is in the assign to column, you are free to add multiple users. Now, your scenario may be such that you've just added one user. It's okay. Still, the response will come in the form of an array, and that array will only have one record. Now, in my case here, I'm using first to respond. Even though I have 2 users here, or let's say 10 users here, I will always get just a single response because the first person who responded, their decision is final. Still, responses will give me an array. And let's say if I want to print the comments that the user puts in. So let's go to comments and pick this. The moment I pick this, if you observe right here, Flow is smart enough to know that it's an array. It goes ahead and adds an apply to each loop. Basically, it loops through that array and then gives you the answers or the property values based on what you selected. So that's my flow for now. Extremely simple. Just wanted to cover some key concepts around what this action does. So I'm going to go ahead and click save. So now this flow is built and saved and ready to go. So let's go ahead and test this flow. And the way I can test this basically is just click on run. It's a manual flow. So I'm starting this flow manually. Now, once this flow triggers, let's actually look at what's happening because that's the crux of what we are trying to understand here. So the flow has started and I can see the check mark here. Now the flow should move ahead to the start and wait for an approval action. And let me try and refresh this to see if the flow has moved ahead. For some reason it's not. We'll wait. And the moment the flow moves to this action, that is start and wait for an approval, Reza and Sarah should get tasks assigned to them. And we can see it moving ahead right now. Start and wait. So what happens? It starts and it waits. What waits? The flow waits. It won't move ahead to the condition until the decision is taken for this action. And as far as this action is concerned, 2 users are going to get the approval task. So the first user who gets the task is Reza. And I'm going to sign in with my other user here, Sarah, as well, just to prove my point that it actually goes out to 2 users. So that's Reza and Sarah. Sarah should also get an approval action. Waiting right here. Here is the approval action for Sarah. Here's my title of the approval, and let me try and zoom in. Here's the title of the approval, the person who requested it, the date at which the approval got created, the details, and because I selected approve and reject, I see those 2 buttons right here. Approvals on the go, meaning I can take my approval decision from multiple places. One is through the email itself. So Sarah can respond right here. Say, you know what, I'm rejecting this. And optionally, Sarah can enter some comments and submit it right here in the email itself. Same thing can be done by Reza as well. Reza can take the decision. Now this is first to respond. The first person who hits that submit button, their response will be considered final. At the same time, there are multiple options for approval. So if Reza was to go to the flow dashboard and go to something known as the approval center, here I can see a list of all the approvals in my tenant that have been assigned to me. And one of them is right here, the user group sample. And I can approve this. I can reject it. I can add comments. I can even reassign to a different user in my organization. That's my second option. Third, I can head over to Microsoft Teams. In Teams, we have the Power Automate Approvals app. It's basically called the Approvals app in Teams. And I have that app installed right here. If you notice, I get a notification from the app that Reza has sent you a request. I'm sending myself a request. Here is that approval task. I can select that, look at the details, enter commands, approve, reject, or just cancel the request. That's my third option. Fourth option on the Power Automate mobile app that I have installed. I've already got the alert on my mobile device. I can't show that right now, but I can take the decision from there as well. So approvers have no excuse to not take a decision because they are being notified in almost every location possible. And now that I have this approval task, let's say Reza goes ahead and says, yeah, I approve this. And I'm going to say it looks good. And I'm going to submit my request. Now, the moment Reza does this, what's going to happen? Let's check out the flow in action first. I'm going to run back to the flow if I can get there in time. So here is flows, here is the flow. The flow has completed. You see it said succeeded. So this task moved ahead because Reza took the decision first to respond. The first person to respond, decision is final. It went into the condition. My condition was, what's the outcome of my approval? Approve or reject. It was approved. It moves ahead. It goes into the yes branch. And this loop will only run once, as I told you, because first to respond, it's an array, so it applies the loop. And right here, I can see all the details of my approval. Go to show raw outputs. We can see all the information right here. Who the approver was, what date the request came in, what date and time the response was received, and here are those approval comments that Reza put in. So every detail of the approval action is available for us in the output properties of the approval action. And we can steal that information and perform a lot of activities with it. Now, what happens if Sarah goes back and tries to respond to that task? The process is already ended. Well, let's check it out. Here's Sarah now going to that email, which is here. If you notice what happened, it says others have already completed this request. So on the fly, that task closed out for Sarah. That's because Reza has already responded. So there's no point in taking a response from Sarah. So the system is smart enough to know that that was your use case. Now, if I was to just tweak this a little, right? Let's say this time, instead of first to respond, I go to everyone must approve. That means every person has to say approved. So let me save this. Same flow, nothing changes. The only difference is the approval type. And this is an example of parallel approvals, by the way. So if I go ahead and I test this flow now, this flow will start and go to start and wait for an approval once again. Once again, Reza will receive the task and Sarah will receive the task email. So here's Reza's email and here is Sarah's email. Last time when Reza approved it, let's say Reza approves it again. Looks good. Submit. So Reza approves it. If we go back to the flow, observe the flow is not going to move ahead. The reason is because it's still waiting to see the decision of the other approvers. Everyone must approve. Had Reza rejected it, had I rejected it, this flow would move ahead. It's because everyone have to say approved. If even one says rejected, there is no point in waiting for the other user's decision. Now, because I said approved, it's still waiting for Sarah's decision. And let's say Sarah says, I'm going to reject this. No, that's my command. No. And Sarah submits the response. It's a reject. Sarah was the last approver as well. So in both cases, this flow should move ahead. And this time, if it goes into the condition, observe it went into the no part of the branch. That's because the output of my condition is rejected. The final decision is rejected, and I can see that right here. And if we look at the approval action, and if we look at the outputs here of the approval action, I'm just going to copy this, go to Visual Studio Code and paste it right here. We can see a lot of important information here. For example, we can see that we have responses, responses, which is the array right here. And in this, I can get each approver's individual response right here. So for example, if I was to look at the first response, this is Sarah's response. Sarah gave me the comment no, the approver response was reject. So I can see the entire details of Sarah's response. At the same time, if I was to look at Reza's response, which is right here, I can see that Reza responded with approved. At this date, he got the request. This is when he responded, and this is Reza's comments. So one person said reject, one person said approved. And the final outcome, the outcome that we check, right? That's right here. And if I was to zoom in, here's my outcome. So if you notice in this case, the outcome has their own independent outcomes. Now, how do I check whether the outcome is truly approved or rejected? Well, it's up to you to decide how you want to play it. Maybe I'm assigning this task to 10 users and all of them are giving me approve, 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 and maybe the fourth one said reject. Well, I can take a decision, right? I can do like quorum approvals. How many are approving? How many are rejecting? Do I truly need, if anyone says rejected, I just want to stop the process. You can do you can create a lot of those patterns by leveraging the response that you get in this JSON. If you know how to traverse JSON in Flow, you can literally play with approvals. And that's what I'm going to show you now in the real world examples that I have prepared for today's call. Okay, so let's get straight into some real world use cases. Use case number 1. And for that, I'll have to look at my demo here. Okay, I'm going to start with first to response. So here's my first use case. I have a help desk or a ticketing based system wherein users come to SharePoint and they create a ticket, right? An IT ticket, a help desk ticket, basically. Now, the moment the user creates this request, I want an approval process to begin. So my flow here gets triggered when an item is created in my SharePoint list. Next, I have some variables that I have created here. I will talk about them in detail later. Basically, what these variables are doing is they are calculating who the approvers are and they're storing all the approval commands so that I can create a history kind of an experience. Now, whenever the user creates a ticket in this system, the user picks a category associated with the ticket. And for the SharePoint folks in the room, which is all of us, category is a lookup column. It is looking up to another list of departments. So that's the category that the user selects. And in this list, I have another column here called approvers, which is a multi-select person type column. Basically, I want to dynamically define my approvers. So if the user selects the category facilities, I want Sarah and James to be the approvers. Right? So based on the department, I have defined my approvers. So if I head back to my flow now, I have an action here called get departments, wherein I'm querying the departments list right here, where the title of the department is equal to the category value that the user has selected when they are creating the ticket. So this gives me the details from my departments list. It'll give me the specific record. Now, once I have that information, I'm running that right here in the loop. I'm fetching the information of that multi-select approvers column, and I'm basically creating an array of approvers right here. This gives me my approvers. Then I go ahead and I update item. Which item? That same item that the flow has been triggered for. And here I change the status of my ticket first to pending because my approval process has started. I want the status to show up as pending. Assign to, this is where I hard coded in the first example. Here I'm using a variable. And this contains my semicolon email addresses of my approvers coming in dynamically from my departments list. Then I have a multi-line text column called approval commands. And all I'm doing right here is I'm storing information about the entire approval process. For example, the approval has been, and I've added some emojis here, guys. So approval started by Reza and started at this date and this time. And I'm also maintaining the date and time at which truly the approval started. That is the current date and time. And here is that wonderful approval action that I showcased earlier. Nothing different. It's exactly the same. First to respond, whoever responds, their decision will be considered final. New request for title, who the approvers are, the details of my approval, all that other good stuff is right here. Then I go through the approval responses. I go through the commands. I then join the commands that the approvers have provided. Finally, I have a condition, same thing, right? I'm checking the output, if it's approved or rejected. Based on that, I'm taking my decision. So let's try and test this out in action. Okay, so here I am in my ticketing system, and let me go ahead and create a new ticket. And I'm using Power Apps to customize my SharePoint form here because I'm a business apps MVP, so I have to show a little bit of Power Apps. So here I'm going to create a ticket. Let's say I need access to the user group. I'm hoping Andy gives me that. So I'm going to say access to user group. And my category is normally access is granted by IT. So I'll pick IT. And this is extremely high priority. So I pick that, calculates the due date, and I'll click save. Now here is where the approval magic begins. I want you to keep a close eye on this item live. Okay, my hands are not even on my keyboard right now. So what's happened right now is the user created a request. It went into the system. Next, the approval process now will begin once the flow triggers. The flow triggers when an item is created in this list. That was my trigger of my flow. Now, the moment that happens, the flow first goes ahead and sets the status of the ticket to pending. Okay, so it updates the item. We saw that action. Now, once it happens in flow, we will actually see it live here in SharePoint Move Ahead. And all of these things that you see here, the timeline, the chat option, these are nothing but column formatting options in SharePoint. So I've basically used some column formatting to show where we are in the approval process. Now what Flow would do is it will go to the departments list. I selected IT, so the approvers here should be Reza and James. So if we go back here, and for some reason the flow is not triggered, so let me refresh. Okay, we can see right here that this access to user group record, the ticket status is now pending. And if you observe here that the task has been dynamically assigned to the approvers, which is Reza and James. I'm even calculating how long these users are taking to respond to the action. So right now I'm giving it in hours right now, so 0 hours, right? They just got the approval action. There are other actions here that are pending for these users for over 50 hours, right? So how do I get all that information? Well, all of this information I'm grabbing from the JSON. I can see the request date. I can see the response date. I can easily do some maths to calculate the difference between those dates and put that out right here. That's exactly what I'm doing. The approval action magically won't give you that, but the response JSON gives you a lot of cool information that you can play with. And that's exactly what I've done here. Now here where it says approval timeline, if I select this pops up the entire approval history. And that is what I'm maintaining in a multi-line text column. And here I'm saying that the approval is started by Reza at this date and this time. Now Reza and James would have got the approval task. So let's try and sign in as Reza. Here is the request that Reza receives. And Reza, let's say, goes and says, yep, this looks good. I approve this. Okay, so Reza says approved. And I think my second approver was James. So I need to sign in with Mr. James. So here's Mr. James trying to sign in to his email. I'm going to respond directly from the email here. And let's say James plays bad cop and says, sorry, I reject this. No. Okay, so James has rejected it. Reza has approved it. Let's try and run back to SharePoint. Now the flow is going to read all that data. It's going to find out what's the final response of the approval. And then it's going to move the timeline ahead, basically change the status of my ticket. And in this case, if you observe, the ticket status went rejected. And if I was to select this, it'll give me all the details of the approval process. What's the decision from Reza? At what date and what time did Reza respond? How long did Reza take? Reza took 1 minute to respond. Here are Reza's comments. James rejected it. James took 2 minutes to respond, and these were James's comments. So I have a full approval history here that I'm maintaining directly in my data source in a column in SharePoint. And just to prove that it's right here, you see I have this column called approval commands. I have all that information here. This approval pending timing, I'm calculating based on the date and time at which the approval task was assigned to the users. And all of this is through the magic of column formatting in SharePoint. It's just simple maths. There's nothing more to this. These are all column formatting based formulas. These are all SharePoint based rules that I'm leveraging. The key here is I wanted to add an approval process on top of this, make it dynamic. And for that, I was able to leverage Power Automate. Let me show you another use case, this time with respect to documents. So here I have I was testing this before the call. So I have a document library in SharePoint called contracts management. Now, the approvals that I've shown you so far were pretty basic, right? Task is getting assigned to users. Yes, it's dynamic, but the patterns are pretty basic, right? Either it goes to one user or it goes to multiple users. You know, I can create serial approvals, parallel approvals, no big deal there. But what if I want to create something known as a state machine workflow? If for folks who come from a Nintex background, Nintex always had a state machine action in their workflows. And a state machine basically means your workflow moves through states. For example, a contract document gets added, I want the contract to go to first, let's say a level 1 approval process. And these are my states or my statuses. Let me show you the values. So a contract gets uploaded, right? It goes to the level 1 approver. If the level 1 approver approves it, it goes to level 2. If the level 2 approver approves it, it's completed. If either level 1 or level 2 rejected, it should go back to the original user. So the user will get a message that, hey, you need to make updates to the contract. Then they resubmit. It goes to level 1. It goes to level 2. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until the final answer is completed. Those are called state machine approvals. Now, if you saw the Power Automate approval action, we did not have that option, right? We have first to respond, everyone must approve. There's nothing called state machine. And this is where templates come in really handy, because there are things that are not available out of the box, but if you create patterns in flow, you can build any scenario in approvals, and trust me, any scenario. And luckily, as part of the templates by the flow community itself, we have the state machine approval template. And if I was to select this, I just want to show you the pattern that this template has. And I selected this template, and what it does is, once I click continue, it will build a flow. Of course, it's not fully baked, it's just a template. You need to add things to this. And what this flow is doing here is it's using a pattern. And the pattern is very simple. It uses the do until action in flow. Basically, this action will keep running until this condition, status is equal to completed. And status is nothing but a variable. Okay, so when this action begins, the variable is being set to new document. This is just an example. The status, is it equal to completed? No. So it will go inside. Once it goes inside, there's a switch condition. Switch on the status. Okay, it's a new document. So what happens? It goes into the case for new document. Okay. And here I can have an approval action. If this is approved, I will change the variable to process document. So it goes right here. I'll change it to completing. So it goes right here. If it's rejected, I'll send it back. I'll send it here. I'll send it there. So basically, I am kind of mimicking a state machine kind of an approval pattern using this technique that has been provided to us for free as part of the templates. And in my case here for contracts management, I actually did exactly that. Here, I have a flow, and I'm going to show you this flow in action right now. I'll just walk through quickly what the flow does. The flow triggers when a new document is uploaded in my contracts management library. Okay, so every time a document is uploaded, this flow starts. Then I have a status variable, and I'm defining my own statuses here. I'm setting it to pending. Same pattern, check it out. Do until. Keep doing this until the status becomes complete. Then switch condition. Switch on the status. Okay, level 1 approval. All right. You know what? I want to start the level 1 approval process. Here I've hard-coded the approver to Reza, but I could have made this dynamic like I showed you earlier. The goal here is to show you the pattern, which is state machine. So level 1 approver is Reza. If Reza approves it, and what do I have to do to check the outcome of the approval? Very simple, approve or reject. If Reza approves it, in that case, I'm changing the status to level 2 because level 1 has approved. So please go to the next level. And that is what I'm setting in this variable. If Reza rejects it, I'm setting the status to updates required. Now, both of these are also cases. Here is updates required, and here is level 2 approval. Level 2 approval is my second approval process, which goes to another user called Sana. If Sana approves it, Sana is the level 2 approver, I change the status to complete. My process ends, my flow ends. That's because this do until branch is complete. The status is complete. If Sana, who is the level 2 approver, was to reject it, I am changing the status to updates required. So if 1 rejects it or 2 rejects it, it will go to updates required. And what is updates required? Well, updates required is nothing but the person who created the document. So I'm sending it back to the creator. And here, guys, I'm using custom responses, right? I'm not using first to respond. I'm not using these options. I'm using custom. And in custom, you can create your own options here. I just have given one option, updates completed. That means when the task goes back to the person who had originally created the document, they have to make the change and they only get one option, that is updates are completed. And when this is done, what do I want to do? I want to start the approval process again. Basically, begin from level 1 approver, and all I have to do is change that variable to level 1 approver. So basically, I am never leaving this condition of do until the status goes to complete. And that's my approval pattern. Now let's try and test this out in action. I'll go ahead and upload a file. I'm uploading a contract document. So Reza comes in and uploads a contract document. And just so that we don't get confused, let me delete the previous one. So we just focus on a single document here. So the document gets uploaded. The status immediately goes to pending. Okay, that means the approval process now is starting up. And the task goes to the level 1 approver. So in my flow, I will, once the flow triggers, this status changes to level 1 approver. And Reza is playing the role of level 1 approver. So Reza should get a task assigned to him. And let's look at the flow in action here. This is the flow right here. Let's see if the flow has triggered. Here you go. It says running just 3 seconds ago. If we head back right here and just refresh, we see the status changing to level 1 approver, and it says the approval process has started. Same concept of maintaining the history. Now, the process begins. Reza receives a task that says contract request for this document, and here's a link directly to that document. Let's say Reza says, yeah, looks good. Okay, submit. Now what happens as part of the process? Reza said approved, state machine. It moves to the next state, which is level 2 approver. And we can see that right here, it's gone to level 2, which is Sana. Now, here is Sana, who is looking at the approval dashboard, okay, in flow. Sana gets that request right here. And this time, Sana is going to reject this and say, need more details, or maybe, contract is missing date, or whatever the use case is, right? So Sana will provide the commands, reject the request, and submit. Now, the moment Sana's decision is logged, if I was to refresh this, you see the status changes to updates required, right? I can see all the history right here. Now, Reza will get the task again because he was the person who created the document in the first place. And here is the task that gets assigned to Reza. And Reza, all Reza can do is just say updates are required. So Reza just says, you know what, I made the changes. You know what, I have made the changes. Maybe Reza went back to SharePoint, updated the contract document, made the changes, submit. So basically, Reza has resubmitted, which means the state is again going to change to level 1 approver. Level 1 approver is again Reza. So you see, this can keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth between the approvers and the original person who created the request. And this can go back and forth n number of times. It doesn't matter. So this time Reza says approved as the first approver. Status will move ahead to level 2 approval. And here is the level 2 approver, which is Sana. And I'm trying to keep this quick because I want to show you a couple more things. So Sana says, okay, all of this looks good. Confirmed. The moment all the magic comes in, we will see the status finally going to complete. The whole history is right here. We can see it in the details here. Each and every step of the approval process is being tracked. Process started. Reza says looks good. Sana says need more details. Reza says I made the changes. Level 1 approver says okay. Level 2 approver says okay. Task went to complete. Right? So you can create these kind of patterns. And if you look at the flow and action that was running for this one, now if I just refresh this, it will say complete because that do until branch has completed. So here you go, a serial pattern, a state machine pattern, a parallel approval pattern. Let me show you 2 more patterns. The approval action does not have any option for reminders. It's a very common use case. And once again, I'm going back to Nintex. Nintex by design had the option to add reminders. What if I want to add reminders to my flow? Well, there's a pattern for reminders as well. Here is what the pattern looks like. Right before assigning your approval task or creating your approval task, and again, I can apply this logic to any of my previous patterns. The focus here is just on reminders. I create a variable, a Boolean variable, and I set it to false. Okay. Then I create a parallel branch in flow, which basically means both of these branches will run at the same time. And the way you add it is just go to plus and say you want to add a parallel branch. Now on the left-hand side, start and wait for an approval. That means the approval begins and waits. Waits for whose response? Reza's response. Once the approval is responded to, then I have this action called set variable wherein I'm setting that reminder variable to true. That means this variable will always be false until Reza has responded to this task or my approvers have responded to this task. Now on the right hand side, in that parallel branch, I'm running a do until loop. And this loop will keep running until this variable becomes true. That is until Reza responds. And here I have included a delay action. And of course, we can't wait for days or weeks or months. So here I've added a delay action of just 30 seconds. So every 30 seconds, once this do until loop runs, it will wait for 30 seconds. Then there's a conditional check. Has this variable changed? Yes or no? If no, if no, then well, send an email. If yes, don't do it. This loop will stop. The flow will close. Let's check it out in action. Let's run this manually. So I'm going to say run the flow, and the flow now triggers, right? Observe how the right-hand side of the branch and the left-hand side of the branch are running simultaneously, right? So Reza should get a task, and Reza should have received the email right here with the task. It's a demo task that I created. Now let's say Reza does not respond to this, right? Reza is on leave, or maybe Reza is just not responsive to the approval task, but it's very important for the approval decision to move the process forward. Now in this do until loop, the moment 30 seconds are hit, right? If the task is not responded to, Reza will get a notification, a reminder email. And this I can keep sending, right? I can keep giving these reminders every 30 seconds, 1 minute, 1 day, to whatever your use case is. I can keep reminding my approver that, hey, there's a task assigned to you. Please go ahead and take your response. And this will keep going out until the approver responds. And finally, when the approver does actually go ahead and respond to that decision, and we'll see it live in action here. Reza responded, this process completed. This branch also will go and check to see if the decision is taken. If yes, the flow finishes. So do we have reminders inbuilt in approvals? No. But can I build a pattern that gives me that? Of course, yes. Let's take one last pattern. Escalations, right? I'm sending the user 100 reminders. He just doesn't care. Okay, why not escalate the task? I assign a task to a user. The user is out of office. In Flow, we have an action to check if the user is out of office. Why not check that? And if the user is out of office, escalate the approval to a different user. And the way we do that is quite simply this. I'm creating an approval task here for Reza. The key here is if you head over to the settings of the approval action, there's something called as duration. Here you can define how long before this action times out. Times out, that means this task is assigned to a user, they have not responded. So after this amount of time, it's going to stop. Now there are a lot of options that you can put in here, and you've got to follow the ISO 8601 format. Because I wanted to save time, this one times out after 1 minute, PT1M. So basically, if Reza doesn't respond within a minute, this one will time out. Once again, I have a parallel branch. This side of the branch will run when, and you can go to configure run after, if this one is successful. That means this action succeeds. The left side of the branch, if we go to configure run after, runs only if this action, which is my approval action, has timed out. So if this action times out, then go and get Reza's manager from AD and escalate the task to Reza's manager. So a new task gets created for Reza's manager. And Reza's manager then can respond to the task. Now this is escalating to a manager. You can even escalate it in different ways, right? If the person doesn't respond, it's auto approved or it's auto rejected. You can take those decisions. You can build those patterns in your flow. You can add reminders to this as well. Right here, I could have added the reminder pattern. I could have added this entire piece inside my state machine pattern. So it's up to you to design your approvals using the approval action. In this case, I will run the flow to show you this live in action, of course. So the flow triggers and the task now gets assigned to Reza for approval. Of course, Reza would have received the approval email, which is the escalation demo. If I respond to this, fair and good, the process moves ahead as normal. If I would not respond to this, which I am not going to, what's going to happen now is after a minute, because I think that's the least time I can put in there, so I had to wait for a minute. After exactly 1 minute, you will notice this action closes out and the process will move ahead to this part of the branch. That's because I built that configure run after feature to say that this parallel branch will run only when this previous action has timed out. And I have defined my timeout interval right here. And trust me, you can make everything dynamic. The timeout interval, the logic, everything can be designed inside Flow. And once this timeout actually takes place, which it has right now, we can see the action is timed out in exactly a minute. It doesn't go to this part, it goes right here. It goes and grabs Reza's manager from AD, which is just my second user, which is Sana. And Sana now should have a task that has been escalated. If I sign in as Sana and go back to the approval dashboard this time for Sana, I get that escalated approval action right here, and Sana can take the decision. So patterns, it's all about designing approvals in the form of patterns. All of these examples that I showed you, of course, I showed you more or less from a basic understanding standpoint, but I have more elaborative demos on these, which I've done as videos, and I will provide all those links in my presentation deck. So I'm heading back to my presentation. These were all the demos, and as promised, I showed you the approval actions. I showed you some of the patterns. I showed you the dynamic approval and how the history gets accumulated. Now, these are some of the best practices. This is not Microsoft's best practices. These are mine based on my understanding of the approval action. First one is you need to plan for something known as the run duration of a flow. It's very important to understand that in Power Automate, when your flow triggers, it has 30 days to complete. Okay. The approval action has no timeline. It can wait for a million years. Doesn't matter. But an approval is always going to be a part of a flow. So you need to plan for your flow run duration, because if your approver does not respond to the task, let's say it's 30 days, the approver has just not responded. You've sent them reminders, they haven't responded, right? In that case, the flow will time out. The flow itself times out. So what happens is the approval task is still there and the approver can respond whenever they want. But when they take the decision, nothing's going to happen. That's because your flow is already completed. So you need to design patterns, and I have a video wherein I show that feature as well, where you can check to see if it's 29 days. If it is, then re-trigger the flow. It's a complex pattern, but you can build that in to avoid falling into that trap. And this is a classic case for long running workflows. When you know your approval process has beat 30 days, be ready to plan the design of your flow or the pattern of your flow. Use the reminder pattern for approvals. It's very important to remind individuals, right? Yes, they get notified in Teams and emails and people forget, right? Use the reminder pattern. Even use the escalation pattern. There are going to be users who are never going to respond, even though they're getting reminders. Maybe that user is on leave. Go check. In Power Automate, you have the option to check if a user is out of office. You can even calculate how many days they are out of office. If you know it's going to take them more than 30 days, your flow is going to be over in 30 days, might as well escalate it, maybe to their manager. You can design things like that in Flow. Utilize all the options that you have, right? Don't limit your approvers to take a decision just from the mobile app, or just utilize all the options, right? Emails, mobile app, approval dashboard, Teams. You got to sell that to your approvers. You got to tell them, hey, you can take the decision from any location of your choice. Build dynamic flows. I am a strong believer of defining approvers dynamically. Never hardcode your approvers. Although I showed that in the demos today, was just trying to explain the concept. But whenever you're building approval workflows, make sure your approvers are dynamically picked, either from a SharePoint list, from a SharePoint group. That way, you don't have to keep going back to the flow and making changes. Your approval history, make sure you store it. Why? Well, I'll talk about that in the limitation. So the limitations, one, of course, is the flow run duration is 30 days. It is a best practice and a limitation because you need to be aware of this. The approval forms, they cannot be customized. My approval video series on YouTube probably has the most hits for my channel. The number one question I get is, Reza, I want to customize the form, right? That email that comes out that has those buttons and that comments. I want to add a text box that says, give me the issue ID, for example. You cannot customize those forms. These are not like your SharePoint designer task-based workflows wherein you could customize the task forms. You can't do that. Uh, you can redirect users to forms. You can have a link in there that takes the user to a different form where they can add additional details. It's not available right now, but that is coming soon, means it is in the roadmap. I spoke about approval history. It's important to maintain that it's important to keep your approval history so that you maintain it. Power Automate maintains your approval history only for 28 days. So if I was to go to Flow and look at my Flow run, that is only maintained for 28 days. This is due to GDPR requirements, and that is not going to change. So if for your business process, the approval history is important, you might as well you store it. And honestly, the approval history that you get in Flow in that summary is very limited. But if you read that JSON and use the technique that I showcased, you can really enhance that feature. Approval emails, the email that goes out still says Microsoft Flow. You can't brand it. You can't add your company theming in there. That's also coming soon. It's in the roadmap. Important to note that approvals are stored in Microsoft Dataverse, whether you like it or not. That's how it has been designed. For folks who have spent time in Power Apps and know the concept of environments, each environment can have a database in which is called Microsoft Dataverse. Approvals are actually stored there. Maybe if we have time, I'll show you exactly where they are stored. You can query it as an admin. You can have an oversight view of all the approvals that are taking place in your tenant. You can do a lot of cool stuff with that as well. So it's just important to note that it's stored there. Is this a limitation? Well, yes and no. It is stored there, and those history information is also maintained there. So you can grab it before 28 days, but after 28 days, it's automatically purged. And finally, there is no inbuilt features for reminders, escalations, serial approvals, what else? State machine approvals. None of them are inbuilt. You only have those 4 actions, but nothing stops you from using templates or designing those cool patterns that I showcased earlier and creating those experiences for your users. And finally, to wrap it up and open the floor for Q&A, learning resources. Approval video series. What I showed today is just literally, I just scratched the surface. There's a lot more to it. I have a full video series on approvals. That's the link to it. The link is case sensitive, bit.ly/learn flow approvals. There are 13 videos, and I believe 9 of them are SharePoint related. Covers a wide variety of use cases. The descriptions of those videos has a link to sample flows, and all of those scenarios that I showcased today, in some form or the other, will be there. Of course, I tried to show different things today, but there are other handy videos and use cases in there. So if you get a chance, then do check it out. Of course, nothing better than Microsoft's documentation. As things get updated, that's the first place you are going to notice those updates is in the documentation. So do keep an eye on that. And one thing that I didn't cover as part of today's session is what if I want to add some sort of markup to the approval request that goes out, the details. There is a specific language for it. It's called Markdown. On the roadmap is a feature wherein you can add full rich text in approval. So I would not focus on that too much right now. That's why I kept it at the bottom, but it's important to note that that's the language that it supports. And that's it. That covers the session for today. And I will now open up the floor for any questions, and these are the details to connect with me.
As always, amazing job. Love it when you deep dive into Power Automate. The resources you put on your YouTube channel are awesome, but to see you actually go through it live was really cool.
Thank you.
And there are a couple things I want to point out as we're queuing up some of the questions. The chat was quite active as you were moving through.
Okay.
Two things I'm really excited that you put in there, specifically escalation, because we see that one all the time. That's one of the biggest requests, and really demystifying the escalation. That's awesome. The other one, and this one is something I've gotten a few requests for here lately, is tracking the amount of time it takes to actually complete the approval task. So to put that inside of the SharePoint list, that's great. Also the dynamic list part, we get that one a pretty good bit because of a lot of the users that we're working with are migrating off of SharePoint Designer workflows into Power Automate. And then you mentioned that even in the best practices, dynamically looking up users rather than hard coding it into the flow and then having to go back and correct it. So the best practices around that were super timely, because I know that's a pretty big one.
All of these that I showcased today are actually from real world client scenarios. I have actually gone through those with customers, and that's what I've put out on my channel, because yes, the approval action is there. You'll find a lot of content about it, but I wanted to keep it more near real world, right? You want to know how long your approval is taking. You want to know who's taking the most. You want to know where there are bottlenecks in your process, right? You want to track and see where your process is failing, or where is it taking the most time. Maybe that process needs to improve. So I think it's very important to grab that information, and all of that is in that JSON that I showcased earlier in Visual Studio. A little bit of code, but if you traverse that there's magic at the other end. And with SharePoint column formatting, it goes to the next level.
Yeah, exactly. So just kind of going down the list of questions, the first one actually dealt with the response approvals, and it asked specifically if it could be built using a distribution or a security group.
Yes, you can. So this is again something that got announced 2 months ago, a month and a half ago. With it was very low key. There was no official blog post about it. Just being an MVP, I came to know about it through the MVP forums. That they do support those email addresses that you put in there. You can put group email addresses. So yeah, they do support both. AD group, I have not. I think it just needs to be a security group in AD, which is an Office 365 group anyways. So yeah, it should work. It should work.
All right. Next up, the enable reassignment option would answer the scenario from above. So let's keep going. When assigning an approval to a group of users, what options are there to track the approvals for all users who have pending and approved task? I'm pretty sure I know how you're going to answer this one.
Yeah,
so.
I have got this one. So I'll tell you what. This is my second most commented. Like the second highest comments is on this. Is, hey Reza, I'm using everyone must approve, right? How do I know who's pending, whose decision is pending, right? If you look at my videos, one of them is on the reminder pattern. In that, I actually check to see who have truly not responded. And the way you can do that, the only way you can do that is by querying Microsoft Dataverse. Why? Because that information is available inside those hidden tables inside the database. Because the approval action does not move ahead, it waits, it just stalls in flow. You cannot get any information out of it until the process ends. So if you need information, run a parallel branch, go to Microsoft Dataverse and grab the information from there. It's not that easy. It's not simple. It is complex. You need premium licensing because you're dealing with Dataverse. You need additional security because you need to be an admin in that environment because you're reading approval information of other users, which could be a bottleneck for a lot of organizations. So there are limitations there, but there are ways around it.
So one of the ways that I've also seen it is to leverage second SharePoint lists, just like you do with the dynamic lookup, so that every time someone's assigned a task, we can track that it's been assigned and then it's been approved, and then you can go on to the next person. The only complexity is when you have like one group, like you have 4 users, and the next group you have 5 users, and then kind of like waiting for the flow to trigger the next step. And really for something like that, you might do a second list and then have to run 5 flows in order to compartmentalize it.
And that's where I kind of don't go beyond a second list, because then I've seen a lot of use cases on the forums wherein people have built extremely complex workflows. Then it comes down to a point wherein it's just not maintainable. It's not scalable. It's not maintainable. You truly don't know what's happening in your process. So there are limitations, but I'm not trying to say Power Automate is better than Nintex or SharePoint Designer workflows. What I'm trying to say is there is a lot of things that's possible with this product if you play it right.
Right. All right. So next up, Teams has an approval app. However, my org, I can only see the first to respond. So I can only see the approved or rejected. Don't know if that's the experience for an all approval flow.
So the Teams, in Teams, the approvals app in Teams, although it uses the approvals engine, it's very limited. If you're actually triggering approvals from there, I've done a video on that also. It's very limited. Of course, in the video I talk as if it's amazing. I have to, but in reality is there are limits there. And if you truly want enhanced, when I say enhanced, I mean if you truly want enterprise grade approval scenarios, you have to go to Power Automate until that Teams approval app improves. I know a lot about it. I can't disclose it. Maybe I can disclose it to Andy later, but not to you guys.
It's a good start. That's what we'll say. It's a good start to get the ball rolling there. All right, let's see. I believe you can only see your approvals within your teams. I'm looking for a way for the group to monitor the progress of the request. I think we've covered that. And
the answer to that is your approval history. I think if you track your approval history, that's how they can monitor and go through the process. So there's no other way. There's no magical way where you'll get a magic button or a magic page that gives you that. No.
Yeah, so a few follow-up questions that kind of relate to that same topic. Like they want to be able to see where they are in the overall approval process outside of there.
Yeah, which is exactly what I showcased in the first demo, right? I can see that it's pending. It's who my approvers are, who is it waiting for, how long they have taken. That was the first demo. So you can know who is not responding. You can have all that information. If it's assigned to a group as well, at that instant, then it gets a little more complex because you need to know who are the members of the group. So in Flow, you will have to break it down. You'll have to add an additional query in a parallel branch to get those users and query Dataverse to get the information. So possible, yes. Complexity level, extremely high.
Yeah. And I think that's it for most of the questions. There were 2 or 3 in a row. There were basically extensions of that approval process. So I know you had a couple of links that you posted in your resources at the end. I put a few of those in the chat. Also, I went ahead and linked to your YouTube channel as well as your blog, your Twitter, your GitHub, and then also linked to the R&D show with you and Daniel to make sure everybody has a link to that. Anybody viewing the recording later, we'll make sure it's in the show notes for the presentation here today. I don't want to take up any more of your time. This has been absolutely awesome. I thank you so much for coming and speaking on everything approvals, kind of the approvals cookbook, if you will, and giving us a live version of that and taking the time to answer the questions. So I know on behalf of all the organizers and the members of the group, really appreciate your time. Anything else as we wrap up? Anything else you want to share?
I'll just want to say thank you, Andy, for reaching out and asking me to be a part of this. I think this was a lot of fun. I hope everyone got something new to learn. If not, at least some ideas around what you could potentially build in using SharePoint and Power Automate. So keep learning. The buck doesn't stop here. There are going to be a lot more things coming, and approvals might not be the same a year from now. So I know what's coming, and I know what additional features are coming. So keep learning and keep applying, and of course, get connected to your user groups. Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. With that, everyone, that is our August meeting. Look forward to seeing you back in September. We will be talking about Microsoft Graph. Reza, once again, thanks. Really appreciate it.
Most welcome, sir. Thank you.